your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. So fasten your seatbelts because you're about to dive deep into the heart of New Zealand's political landscape. Stay tuned, stay informed, and stay engaged with the Order Paper podcast.
And kia ora, good afternoon. It's midday here in Wellington, and welcome to today's show of the Order Paper. Now, just with some bit of housekeeping stuff on there, Parliament did go into urgency after the budget on Thursday. We have not covered any of the footage, considering the urgency went right through till midnight, and not all the legislation that was intended to be passed under the urgency has passed. And I did check with Assistant Speaker Greg O'Connor as contact whether the House will be sitting today, but no, the House is not sitting today, and the House will not be sitting till the 25th of June. It was quite interesting. The bit that was also pointed out there was more legislation on the planned calendar for this 7-week period than last year's last government, and they've only got one sitting week, whereas last year they had 5. So it's a bit of an interesting time up ahead on what's happening in Parliament. We will be looking at having a show next Monday will be to cover what happened under urgency, as by then we'll be able to go through, work out what's been done, and actually have a severe good look at the footage. Under urgency, quite often there's you can be looking at urgency starts from 9 a.m. in the morning and goes right through till midnight. So you can guess that's a ton of footage to look through compared to a normal Order Paper show. So let's bring in our panelists for today, Rex Widdestrom and Eric Chua. How are you both?
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, great day for our king and country and Commonwealth.
You make it sound like you're not a Republican.
Well, kind of supportive of the king. I mean, he has held the nation together. Through thick and thin. I mean, World War I, World War II, and yes, it's traditional.
You're not. Remember, the current king wasn't born until after World War II.
well, we kind of, it's kind of like all right, like a national institution, the convention that we hold allegiance to for our forefathers, and though I'm Portuguese mixed with Chinese, I kind of, when you become a New Zealand citizen, you swear allegiance to the crown and to the realm, yes, and to the king. And previously was a queen.
Queen, yes, yeah.
Great queen, and you're serious about it. It's that's we have to see citizenship that way, and proud to be one. I mean, well, I was part of the Commonwealth anyway from Malaysia, so I'm half European, half Chinese, and I kind of understand the best of both worlds. I mean, we are. Interestingly, New Zealand, we are right there in the Pacific between both sides of the world, and it's a great nation. And he holds things together by our allegiance, whatever our political views, from left to right, center. So I think
that is true. One thing that is common is the crown or the sovereign.
Yes, the sovereign crown.
Yeah, it's quite an intriguing thing on there. Yeah. So I've gone through and had a look at the Resource Management, Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill. I haven't really taken much about on Tuesday because, to be honest, government bills are boring. And I like Members' Day because Members' Days have much more interesting bills that have gone through Parliament. Oh, right. I'm not sure if that's a general consensus of the panel.
Generally, it is, yes. Yeah, government is forced to pass a lot of administrative type acts, and so overall they're boring. Some of them get very contentious and interesting, but percentage-wise, boring generally. Yeah,
boring. Yes, yeah. So let's so looking at so the bill that I found quite interesting was the Resource Management, Freshwaters and Other Matters Bill. So let's get to our favourite. Was it the Bish from the Hut? Is that the best term we can sit there and call it, Rex?
He's still here as far as I know.
Yes, he's still there and still living in the constituency.
Oh, yes, he's just built himself a flash new house on the hills of Eastbourne, looking down upon his subjects as any monarch.
And the great part is he has a choice of Crown Limousine, the 81 or the 83 bus in, or the ferry to work.
And he'll soon have a cycleway right round Eastbourne till it's washed away, of course, the first good storm, but what's 20-odd million between friends?
Oh, yes. And, and also on the other one is he might not be MP by the time the Patani to Nauranga section is finished. Who knows what could happen?
He may not be alive, I don't think, by the time that's done.
You're making it sound like Transmission Gully. That was proposed when my grandfather was born as a kid. And it's finally opened like a couple years ago.
Yeah, very much that way, I think.
I thought you were in a dystopian movie or something.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so here's the first section on the Freshwater bill. I have set everything up.
Madam Speaker, I present a legislative statement for the resource management.
What's happening in the Speaker's chair?
What?
All right. So argument's been heard from both sides. My job is to protect the tikanga of this Parliament. This Parliament. It is the Parliament of all people in New Zealand, and there is no intention to offend anybody in the upholding of its own tikanga. And tikanga does not allow for speeches from the gallery. It never has. And on that basis, we will now proceed. And those who do not want to accept that will unfortunately, that is, no change can be made.
Okay, looks like something happened that we've got the aftermath of it.
So we're proceeding with the previously called bill. The Honourable Christopher Bishop.
The second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just start again. I present a legislative statement for the Resource Management, Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill. I move the bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Primary Production Committee to consider the bill. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be reported to the House by the 30th of September 2024. Mr. Speaker, for too long, New Zealand's farmers have been tangled up in red and green tape, which has prevented them from unlocking productivity on their own farm. Mr. Speaker, we need to acknowledge that New Zealand's farmers are some of, if not the best, in the world. Burying them under unnecessarily and unreasonable, burdensome pile of regulations and compliance requirements is harmful for our economy, makes very little sense.
Too much.
This government, Mr. Speaker, backs New Zealand farmers to make sensible, pragmatic choices which boost their productivity on their own farms and to protect the environment at the same time. Getting Wellington out of farming is an important part of our plan to get the economy back on track. We are committed as a government to unlocking development and investment in infrastructure, housing, horticulture, aquaculture, forestry and mining, whilst ensuring the environment is protected. To enable this growth, sir, and to support our primary sector, we are delivering on our promise to improve resource management laws and reduce regulatory burdens. As the House knows, we're taking a phased approach to resource management law reform. We're currently in phase 2, and this started with the introduction of the fast-track one-stop shop approvals bill, which is currently before the Environment Committee, and it's partly because the committee is extremely busy with that bill. What's that? No chance of that, Mr. Bennett. The electorate for which Mr. Bennett used to be the representative will discover that many of the projects and many of the benefits of the fast-track bill apply to the great electorate of New Plymouth, as will other electorates around the House. So we've started with fast track, and today this is the first of 2 resource management bills which make urgent time-critical changes to the system. This is Resource Management Bill 1, quick targeted changes to give certainty to councils and resource consent applicants. to enable economic growth in key sectors, including farming, mining and other primary industries, and Resource Management Bill 2, we are working away on, and we will have more to say about that in due course. That will be a more substantive bill, and will also make targeted changes to the resource management system, but also national direction. So let me run through the details of the bill. There are 6 key changes. The first is in relation to the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. The bill proposes to exclude the hierarchy of obligations in the NPS-FM from resource consenting. This will address concerns about the way it's being applied while a review is undertaken, review and replacement of the Freshwater Management Policy Statement is undertaken. Regional councils will be obligated still to give effect to this, the NPS-FM, including the hierarchy in their policy statements and plans. This is about individual resource consents having the hierarchy of obligations applied to those individual resource consent applications. That was never the intention of the NPS-FM. There is some evidence that that is what is happening, and so we are clarifying that. The second is in relation to stock exclusion regulations. It repeals the problematic and contentious low slope map and associated requirements from stock exclusion regulations, reducing costs for farmers. Regional councils and farmers will decide where stock needs to be excluded based on risk and a catchment-focused approach, and this will be a good benefit for our farming community. The third thing it does, Mr Speaker, is in relation to intensive winter grazing. It repeals the permitted and restricted discretionary activity regulations and associated conditions for intensive winter grazing from the National Environmental Standards for freshwater. Regional councils tell us there's been a significant improvement in winter grazing practices around the country. Farmers are proactively making better decisions about where they plant crops and how they manage winter grazing. Sector groups have confirmed their continued and collective commitment to work alongside farmers and regional councils to ensure good outcomes. Winter grazing will instead be managed through freshwater farm plans, regional council plans and farmers following good management practices as outlined in the winter grazing module. The fourth thing it does is in relation to consenting pathways for coal mining. The bill aligns the provisions for coal mining with other mineral extraction activities under the NPS-IB, National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and National Environmental Standards for Fresh Water. So the bill extends the consenting pathway for coal mines to new coal mines and removes the sunset clause on consent pathways for thermal coal. This means that coal mines will have to meet the same tests and requirements to manage their environmental effects as similar activities. Mr Speaker, as the Honourable Shane Jones would no doubt point out if he was here, coal is required for food production, energy security and industrial production such as steel manufacturing. If it's not mined domestically, all we do is import coal and steel with potential flow-on costs, increasing greenhouse gas emissions. Fifthly, Mr Speaker, the bill suspends for 3 years the requirements under the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity for councils to identify new significant natural areas, SNAs, and include them in district plans. It also extends some implementation timeframes until 31 December 2030. This is so we can do a full review of the operation of SNAs and changes made before the existing regulations are locked in through council decisions. Criteria in the NPS-IB sought to standardise the approach for identifying our most important biodiversity areas, but there are real concerns, Mr Speaker, amongst many communities that the criteria is capturing areas with less significant natural biodiversity, placing undue restrictions on how land is used. And we recognise, Mr Speaker, that landowners are already investing time and resources in protecting native biodiversity, and we take an approach on this side of the House which works collaboratively and in conjunction with landowners and incentivisation of this work, rather than restricting what they can do with their land. That's what a property rights-based approach does. And I want to acknowledge Associate Minister Hoggard for the important work he is doing in this area, as in so many other areas. Across the coalition, Mr Speaker, between the ACT Party, the National Party and the New Zealand First Party, there's a real collective drive and commitment to sorting out our resource management laws. Finally, Mr Speaker, I'm just going to choose to ignore that comment. Finally, Mr Speaker, the bill speeds up the process for, well, it's easy to ignore when you didn't actually hear it, but no doubt you'll have your say. Finally, Mr Speaker, the bill amends the process for developing or amending national direction. This is a really important change, Mr. Speaker. The process costs too much and takes too long around national direction. It's typically a 2-year process to amend items of national direction, as other members in the House will know. We now have a suite of national policy statements sitting under the RMA across lots of sectors of the economy. And it's important that there's an expeditious process for making changes to that national direction. So there are targeted and technical changes to speed up the statutory timeframe and evaluation reporting requirements. It streamlines and simplifies the process for amending a national environmental standard, a national planning standard, a national policy statement, or indeed the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. Mr. Speaker, we intend to progress a suite of national direction changes next year to unlock development and investment in infrastructure.
I think we've got the gist of what the Bishop is trying to say. Very well. He very concisely summarises what the purpose of the bill is.
Quite well too, I think. I mean, like, okay, I have to say this. I mean, I was working as an insurance broker for the farms, and driving like 1,000 kilometers, mate, from Hamilton up to Whakatōhea, and then driving like 50 kilometers on a dirt track road to a farmer, right? And then, sorry, mate, can you come back later? I'm calving, you know. And then you go to the local, mobile station or whatever. But hey, mates, I mean, look, they have so many regulations, and so much insurance for everything. I mean, we Jill and Joe blocks outside of farming side of it, we don't really know. The amount of land that they have, but the amount of the extent of responsibility just to till the land, just to produce any ewes or any calves, and just to make money is so tight for them. And the banks are scrutinizing them. So I think from the point of view of the Right Honourable Chris Bishop, I think he's trying to, whether it's the right word to use, to loosen the rules and regulations concerning, their own property as a kind of maybe sea rights meals. I mean, if those of you who do politics, I teach that, is that individual liberty and the right to property. I mean, it's their farm, for goodness sake, as long as they don't build a 10-story high-rise building, which they'll not be allowed to anyway. But at least, my God, they can use more of our fantastic, expensive ewes and lambs. I mean, look, I was in Germany, and when I look at our kiwi, 1 kilo of our kiwi, steak, it's like €35 euro. And I'm not going to buy that, of course. I'll be buying the German one for like $10. But look, that's our quality, because we actually take our food is the grass. We don't give them all kinds of plastic, feed and whatever materials that chemically produce. Yeah. So it's pure grass. So it's fantastic beef. So I mean, that's just the beef side of it. There's the lamb, and so I mean, I think that's helpful to them to increase the competitiveness with other farming communities around the world. Yeah. But, well, I mean, everyone is entitled to their opinion, so I'll leave it to your other perspectives. Yeah.
Well, if you look at the title of the bill, it mentions fresh water, and the trouble is, in many respects, what happens on a farm has literally downstream effects, and we in this country have had for some time a problem where cows are allowed to graze in streams that run through farms. They defecate into that water, and that pollution is then carried downstream, and it's only recently been cleaned up. Now, whether this amendment will have the effect of loosening the regulations around that again, I really can't tell. And I think it will come down a lot to the goodwill of farmers. And if you met a lot of them, you'd know I was an editor of a farming newspaper for many years. Many of them are very concerned about the environment. Many of them do the absolute best they can to not cause pollution. Others say, not my problem, mate. I've got a farm to run. Somebody else can clean up my mess. So it will depend on farmers' goodwill, I think, as it always has, and it will depend on the I don't know, the capacity of regional councils, I guess, to go out and check what is happening on all these far-flung farms, which isn't particularly high anyway. So I think we have to be a little bit cautious about welcoming this. I mean, there's a lot of restrictions on farming. You're right, that is ridiculous. Whether they can, saw down a stand of trees or something like that that's on their own property. Should be no question whether that's okay or not. That's got no downstream effects. But where we're talking about fresh water, it does. And I do have some concerns about loosening the standards around that, especially when, as Mr. Bishop says, they're doing that while they're figuring out what's going to replace it.
And what about the filtration system? I mean, you did say that there was a cleanup done, right? So do we have any filtration systems now that as it goes downstream, things are filtered and cleaned like a natural integrated?
Not unless you're extracting the water outside the stream or putting it for a hydroelectric dam.
Right. So something that we can look at to kind of create filtration systems downstream.
But you'll probably have the same farmers who don't want to clean up the mess would sit there and not want to pay for the cost of that.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other thing is there are multiple of these little tiny streams that then join up into a slightly bigger stream. Where do you put that sort of filtration? If you've got one farmer, say you've got 3 tributaries and one farmer is polluting it, but you put it at the point where those 3 tributaries meet, then should the other 2 farmers have to pay for that system? And just simply the number of those sorts of systems and where they would be placed would be a nightmare for somebody. And no, we've never filtered it. And Mr. Bishop would well know that in his own electorate of the Hutt, there is the Hutt River, where I and many other people used to go swimming as children. And now every summer when the level gets low, we're warned not even to let our dogs in there because there is such a high proportion of toxic algae. And there's just got a grip on the river now because of the many, many years of farm pollution from way up in the Wairarapa and beyond, from all these little tributaries that have come through the Tararuas. So we're almost trying to shut the door after the horse is bolted, but he seems to be inclined to wedge it a little bit further open. So I have concerns about this, I have to say.
But we can penalize farmers just because of that, because that's one of the mainstay of our industry. And then, of course, if we comply with most of the green laws that we have already instituted, I mean, that should be okay. But it does. It's a food for thought thing that perhaps we may want to look into in the longer term, a more integrated system of filtration that could help across the board to maintain our clean environment. I mean, we are talking about one of our mainstays of our industry. I mean, our milk powder is so raison d'etre that we sell it to the, very expensively overseas. Our milk is like, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
We will move on to, we've got Lan Pham from the Greens, where she will give the Greens speech towards the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I joined this Parliament, I was really heartened to learn of and also experience the immense privilege that we have here to actually access information in this place. And I know, especially for my colleagues across the House, that is even more accessible when the public service can actually go to work and do the consultation, get the data, get the evidence that ministers need to actually make truly informed decisions. And I want to raise that today in the context of this RMA amendment bill, Mr. Speaker, because this bill makes a mockery not only of this government's claim that they care about data and evidence, but it also makes a mockery of their duty of care that Kiwis expect of their government when it comes to responsible governance for te taia or our environment. And within that, Kiwis' rights to actually have their say. So I want to begin there on the consultation aspect, Mr. Speaker, because officials' advice across these supplementary analysis reports make it clear that the government simply has not had the time or the care about what Kiwis would have to say on these bills. Let's take, for example, the coal mining aspect. There was official advice that says there was no time for consultation, none with iwi Māori, no assessment of the treaty impacts, including on the Crown's treaty settlements or commitments. For the amendments that have to do with freshwater, consultation was, quote, limited. The limited feedback that they did receive from iwi Māori was, quote, one of disappointment and frustration and concern about the, quote, potentially irreversible negative impacts on freshwater quality. So that's a bit of a taste of what the government might have heard if they did take the time to go out for public consultation before getting to this stage. But let's go back to the data and evidence part of what this government cares about and ask what the experts actually say. Because when these changes were first announced, 50 of Aotearoa's top freshwater experts and leaders were so concerned about it that they actually organised and wrote a letter to the Prime Minister and ministers clearly and concisely stating their concerns. And I will quote them here. New Zealand's rivers, lakes and aquifers are in a dire state. The country's freshwater policy, including Te Mana o Te Wai, is the result of decades of public concern and policy development. To weaken this now would be to take the country and our communities backwards. And that's just the freshwater aspect of this bill. The rest of it contains a litany of short-sighted environmental destruction. And I wanted to take the example of the coal mining aspects because I couldn't quite believe my eyes, Mr. Speaker, when I read the supplementary analysis report for this bill on, quote, amending the consenting pathway for coal mining in or around wetlands and significant natural areas. And this, I might add, is in addition to the 3-year suspension for actually identifying these significant natural areas for councils. The advice from officials made it clear that, quote, it is not possible to quantify how many new coal mines or extensions for existing coal mines would be affected by the proposed changes, and that, quote, there is a risk of irreparable damage to and loss of wetlands if a consent pathway is to be provided. Mr. Speaker, I don't know where to start with this aspect of the bill other than to say the science is crystal clear that if we want to prevent a future filled with climate catastrophe and extreme weather, then fossil fuels need to stay in the ground. Protecting nature or keeping fossil fuels in the ground is not some woke idea or whatever the latest culture war buzzword is. It's about the scientific fundamentals of human survival on this planet that we call home. When this government won't listen to the science, the evidence, to iwi Māori or to the public, we have a serious threat to our future and in our hands, and the only solution is to get organised, get loud and make our voices heard. And on Saturday, 8th of June, we'll be heard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So, Lance reply to the bill, and we'd just like to welcome Blake, who's joining us for part of the show, who's just got in. Welcome.
Hi, Sam. Good to be with you.
Yeah.
I've actually come in partially to talk about what we're doing around the Maori War this week. So,
Hold off on that one. We're focusing on that. We'll leave that towards the end of your piece, okay?
okay.
Yeah. So we'll focus in on Lan's bit about the the environmental, the resource management, freshwater and other matters amendment bill. And I think it was very good that she mentioned a bit about, it mentions coal mining.
I actually liked her speech. I watched this live when it was going, and I actually really liked it. I think she's one of the more sensible MPs from the Green Party in this current term. I've liked a lot of her speeches, and yeah, I quite like how she projects herself. I don't know if anyone else on the panel would agree or disagree.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Well said. I think she said it well, and I mean, she brought out the important points. Credit to her. I like to give credit as credit is due, whatever the political perspective as a panelist. And I'd like to add too, but then I mean, look, if mining helps to create jobs, right? Like what the Right Honourable Christopher Luxon said was like the rare earth materials are needed in every mobile phone, and would the Greens MP get rid of all their mobile phones just to make sure there's no rare earth there to protect the environment? Of course not, right? So basically, as long as the environmental laws in we do have strict provisions that are maintained, the mining may not necessarily affect the fresh water if they have proper systems of filtration, and if let's say our buddies across the ditch have any rare earth investments, they're going to invest like billions. They can just make sure that that everything is filtered properly, and
So would you say planting trees along the mine property boundaries to help absorb some of the runoff before it heads into a fresh water supply might be a step?
Well, I could put an embankment around the area, embankment, like kind of protect the soil from eroding. I mean, there are ways and means to go about it. Like, in respect of our environment to maintain that. It's not necessarily going to be like one big hole in the middle of somewhere, and that can pose dangers because of the soil erosion, no trees to hold up the soil during heavy rains and all that. Acknowledge on that one. There's been many cases across the world, landslides on unbridled development. I won't name the countries. We're not in a name and shame country thing, but in due respect, we could maintain these farms. These mining consortiums to make sure that they kind of do it properly and still create jobs. So I think we kind of don't see that this affects the green side of things. I mean, unless the Green MPs want to go back to the analog phones and no more Instagram, no more Facebook.
Yes, I don't picture seeing the Greens literally do it, considering many of those MPs themselves manage their own social media feeds. They don't need to pay 7 people just to manage their social media.
Oh my gosh, all right. So,
I mean, for me, it's a bit rich that they talk about, phones, because, you've got Mr. Luxon calling himself the king of TikTok.
Oh, did he? Oh, I didn't know. I didn't hear about that.
Right.
Yeah, the king of TikTok. Yeah.
There are a lot of dangers around mines, and I'm sure you're all aware of tailings that have collapsed, and they've had a long history of collapsing since the 1800s, since they started using tailings as a way of storing wet wastewater waste from dams. Again, it comes down to, yes, all these things are possible in a perfect world if we have a rigorous inspection regime that regularly checks that these things are being done properly. Pike River proved that we don't, especially in the coal industry. And so
we only have one mine inspector.
Yeah, look, it can be done. Will it be done properly in New Zealand? I have my doubts.
Okay, let's cross over to now. Where is it now? I'm just trying to find on there. The Minister for Biosecurity from the ACT Party, Andrew Hoggett.
That I've had involvement with. Those are the provisions around significant natural areas, the rules around stock exclusions, and the winter grazing component. Now, before I do, we've heard a bit about how this is going to be the end of nature in New Zealand from the other side. Despite these people previously protesting and getting all aggrieved about being accused of being at war with farming, yet these words clearly demonstrate they're still at war with farming. Up and down the country, farmers are taking care of biodiversity on their farms, making changes to winter grazing practices, all before any regulations came about. And since 2003, 25,000 kilometres of riparian margins have been fenced off. And that's just by the dairy sector alone that we've measured. We haven't measured all the work that's been done on the sheep and beef farms up and down the country. I'm seeing more and more of that on a regular basis. If you've added that all in, I am sure would probably double that number. Turning to the proposed changes around the mapping of significant natural areas, this comes from the ACT National Coalition Agreement. This suspends the requirement to identify new SNAs by councils while we review how SNAs are managed in the future. There have been numerous concerns from many landowners around the implication of having an SNA on their land. For many, it's the principle of their property rights being trampled on, and where this might go in the future with zero compensation or recognition of those property rights. For many, there is the question around, is this really significant? When you're a landowner on the west coast of the South Island, where around 86% of the land is included in the DOC estate, you are quite justifiably scratching your head, going, why the hell is my half a hectare so vital that all these restrictions need to be placed on me? Haven't we already protected quite a significant amount of the land in this region already? Then there's that word, significant. We see numerous examples of what could generously be called scrub being viewed as significant. Going forward, we need better definitions of what significant is, and we also need a much better carrot type approach to improve biodiversity on private land as opposed to the opposition's favoured go-to stick method. The previous stock exclusions low slope map and its various evolutions have proven once and again that one size fits all from Wellington isn't the solution. Where there have been, there would have been extensive properties forced into financially crippling fencing programs. Think of all the farms you see on Country Calendar. These are the sort of farms that would be put out of business by having to do all this. These are not farms that are having an impact on water quality. Instead, many of these farmers looking at these regulations, their only option was to go into pines, which is not what we're wanting. Many regions also had long-standing stock exclusion rules that made sense for these regions. And as I mentioned, the dairy sector had already been a long time engaged in this job. I mentioned the changes around the winter grazing regulations. Once again, it was a one-size-fits-all approach from Wellington. Farmers have made significant gains in the last 4 to 5 years in how they manage this practice, and we've seen great uptake of the winter grazing module. All the current and soon-to-be previous regime did was add cost by forcing a regulatory burden on councils and farmers. The biggest frustration many had with this system was the fact that there was supposed to be an alternative pathway of farm plans. However, what we got instead was not fit for purpose, was costly, complex, and also overlooked in a practical sense all the existing farm plans that were out there. Having a farmer-focused farm plan system, Mr. Speaker, is where I truly believe we will turn the dial forward on improving water quality outcomes out there in regional New Zealand. This government is committed to ensuring we have a fit-for-purpose system that doesn't create duplication of paperwork, provides farmers with good knowledge and plans on how they can make a difference in their catchments. That, Mr. Speaker, is the way forward, not an endless stream of green tape from Wellington. I commend this bill to the House.
Someone's definitely making their big points about fencing off rivers.
Yeah. I mean, again, I empathise with what he's saying about farmers. If you look what the farmers go through, and as Rick was saying earlier, that they do go through a lot of all these red tape regulations. I mean, can you imagine a farmer having a Whakatōhea tree right there, smack in the middle? You have to fence it and treat it like a Buddha or a god or something. And I mean, that kind of can really affect the business side. You're talking about the 20 to 30 workers in some average big size farms. So, I mean, in the sense that it does affect the farmers' ability to, with so many rules and regulations, even after they have complied with all the rules and regulations. I mean, what else have they got to do? And then they go into pine, and then the arable land, rich arable land is lost to Kiwis for generations. So, I mean, this is, yes, it's from a farming perspective point of view, but there is validity. I mean, and this, what Andrew was trying to share was the hatred for farmers creating by someone just reading a book on environment, in university, and you're enjoying your mocha, your coffee, and all that in Wellington.
I want to ask, and this might be a good one. Whenever I've watched Country Calendar, it's always been a positive-based show. Do you think Country Calendar is going to show an episode of a farmer flat out breaking every environmental regulation in the country? I'm very sure Country Calendar would never show an episode that mentions that.
Yeah, I don't agree with the minister in regards to the Country Calendar reference, because I think it's quite a poor reference. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, you have a point there. I mean, I was actually recalling this kind of not every farmer is, we have good farmers and farmers who don't follow the rules. And I remember there was one farmer somewhere in Waikato that was actually using rotten eggs to feed the cattle. Now, he was found out. I mean, the smell coming from was so great that the other farms complained about it. And he was found out. He was fined. And I think he's not running the farm. I think he was prosecuted, and they may have taken the farm. Yeah. So this is not now, mate. This is like, God knows, 15, 20 years ago. You just Google up and you see that the farmer fined and removed from farm for feeding rotten eggs, which can be poisonous, bacteria and all that to us and to those people they export to. So they were already stringent rules then. So there was no need to, based on any agenda, to hate farmers for producing food that we eat. I mean, look, we are currently penalized probably because of the hard work of the farmers that make New Zealand wealthy enough, for us. So I think, let's give credit where credit is due. We don't have to throw the baby out with the dirty bathwater. We get rid of the bad stuff from. But and the farmers, I mean, okay, look, there's 12 good. Let's say there's 20 good farmers, right? And there are one chicky.
Well, put the finger on you for timekeeping, Eric.
Okay, mate. Yeah.
Rex, haven't heard much from you. I'm not sure if.
Sorry, Rick. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Again, I just keep coming back to the same concerns. Yes, people get caught doing bad things, but do they all get caught doing bad things? No, because we don't have enough MPI inspectors now, and I'm sure that I assume, I haven't got the figures in front of me, that they will be amongst the cutbacks that this government is bringing in. So on the one hand, they're saying, look, don't worry, we'll have a free rein and rely on everybody to do the right thing, and we'll enforce that. And at the same time, we'll take some of that enforcement capacity away. Yeah, we're back again to relying on the goodwill of farmers, and most farmers do their very, very best, and I do know that from my time editing farming newspapers. But there are some people who will do those terrible things, and we're not going to catch them doing it. Surely the answer is this thing that they're doing going to affect anything outside their own farm? The Pūtakawa tree. If he cuts that down, is it going to affect anybody else? No. Let him do it. Let him do it. Stop putting a fence around it. Is is the cows defecating in the river going to affect anybody else? Yes, then he should have to fence the river. It's quite a simple rule to apply, and yet we seem to bury it under miles and miles of red tape unnecessarily, and then don't have the people to enforce the red tape.
And what happened to our 16,000 bureaucrats that the previous Labour government has installed? I mean, I'm sure they could use them more efficiently. I mean, we are just minusing up 3,000. There's still about 13,000 extra bureaucrats. We should rechannel them into.
Yeah, well, we have had population growth. We've had population growth, but I mean, you know, I can picture this. Hi there, I'm normally working in case management, but today I'm an MPI fence inspector. Sorry, am I allowed to walk with my high heels on the grass? Is that safe? Or do you have a spare pair of gumboots, Mr. Farmer or Mrs. Farmer?
That's exactly where those 16,000 are. They're in middle management and in office somewhere in Wellington, with some title like policy analyst, and they probably never put a red job.
Time to go to MPI. We have shifted into the MPI section. No more here. You have to leave your apartment and live in the gumboots land.
You can picture exactly what it'll be. Okay, so we'll finish up with Tuesday because most of the bills are boring. And we'll go to the fun part, Members Day. And the reason why I like Members Day's bills is this is when you get to see a lot more cooperation across the side of the house, or lack of cooperation, as can be seen there. So here is Greg O'Connor's private members bill, the Child Protection, Child Sex Offender Agency Registration, Overseas Travel Reporting Amendment Bill, which is in third reading.
I call on Members' Order of the Day number 1.
Child Protection, Child Sex Offender Government Agency Registration, Overseas Travel Reporting Amendment Bill, third reading.
Greg O'Connor.
Madam Speaker, I move that the Child Protection, Child Sex Offender Government Agency Registration Overseas Travel Reporting Amendment Bill be now read a third time. If you just indulge me,
yes.
Madam Speaker, this requires the same versatility and dexterity my appearance on the rugby field in Gisborne did this last weekend.
And I'll just ask the clerks to make sure that the clock's set for 10 minutes when the speaker starts. Yeah, thank you.
That will be to the relief of my colleagues on this side, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Child Protection, Child Sex Offender Government Agency Registration Overseas Travel Reporting Amendment Bill is now entering its third reading, and if it actually does pass today, it will be the first members' bill to have passed in the current Parliament. And I think that's significant, Madam Speaker, because it's a bill that has had quite a considerable journey through the last Parliament, and this Parliament has been considered by two committees, Justice Select Committees, led by Venushi Walters and James Meagher. And so I think because the subject of the bill, child sex offenders and protecting our children against them, is a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of not only all members but all New Zealanders, I think it's highly appropriate that it has had the agreement of virtually the whole House through all its readings. So it gives me great pleasure to be standing here today to be reading on what I hope is the passing of this bill. Now, Madam Speaker, when we speak of child sex offenders, I was a detective for many years in New Zealand Police and dealt with a large number of offenders. But there was a class of offender that I dealt with, particularly in my latter years when I actually established child abuse teams in Masterton and in Pororua, where I had my eyes open to a whole different world of offending. Now, it's been apparent to me as this bill has made its way through the House. Sometimes you don't realise how much you know because of your previous experience. But what it became apparent to me is that when I was dealing with members on all sides of the House, and in fact any conversations I had that people when they speak about child sex offenders, they're often thinking of the man in the park, the horn-rimmed glasses guy who hovers, or the man in the blue van who is the stranger that we warn our children against. But that's not where the danger is. And because of most of the cases, and I reflect of the cases I dealt with, and most police officers do, almost invariably the offender and the victim are known to each other, or certainly the offender is known to the victim's family. So when we look at the protections required for our children in particular, it's important to note that. So this bill, Madam Speaker, sits on top of a bill which was passed in 2015, which ensures that those who are placed on the register, and shortly I'll go through the qualifying criteria, those that are placed on that register are regarded, have a special form of protection for potential victims, but also, Madam Speaker, for themselves because of the unique nature of their offending. The bill, which was, again, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to speak about dealing with these offenders also. They are often seen and even portrayed sometimes in media as predatory, well-planned people with a vast network that they're dealing with. Again, that's not the case. These people are often solitary, while we often see cases where they will join together through electronic and through making sure they access the type of material that we don't want them to. Actually, when it comes to the offending, often it is very much lone offending. Interviewing these people, they're pretty pathetic sort of individuals themselves. And so when I say they need the protection, when they do go to prison, they have a very hard time in prison. Some would say rightfully so, but certainly it's not somewhere where they want to go back to. And these offenders actually have a relatively low recidivism rate compared to other offenders. Again, for two reasons. One, often they're older when they're found, and the offending will be historical. Secondly, they will actually have had programs when they went through prison and are relatively well monitored. And so it means we've been relatively successful in ensuring that these people don't continue their predatory activities, and we are able to protect our children in that regard. So when this bill was brought in originally, what it ensures is that when these offenders do go to visit family, if they're going to leave once they're on this child register, if they do go to visit elsewhere, they want to go to Napier for the weekend, they want to go to Dunedin for the weekend, they are obliged to tell the police, to tell their case officer where they're going to be going, where they're going to be staying, and importantly, any children that are going to be at that address. Not only giving that protection to the children that will be at the address, but also ensuring that they know that we know, which is, again, is one of those big protections. However, what becomes apparent is that those same protections are not made available to those who are living overseas. Earlier this year, I was in the Cook Islands, and I outlined to the Cook Islands Parliament this piece of legislation as an example of a member's bill. And there was considerable interest because they know there that many of these offenders do go back to visit family in places like the Cook Islands, places like the islands, whether it be Queensland, Victoria. So while we're well aware of the offending that goes on in places like in the Golden Triangle up in Asia, and that is another class of offending, this really is designed to protect our children or grandchildren, or the children in general, who are likely to be visited by these people. I'm informed by police there's about 20 odd individuals who do travel to Australia, who travel internationally, who are on this register each year. Now, these are not the very serious offenders, because the very serious offenders are actually usually still under probation. They're still under other orders, and they're very unlikely to ever get permission to travel overseas. These are the people who have served their time, who are on this register, and the research shows that they're likely to continue to offend throughout their lives. And so ensuring that we have the protections that they know, that we know, that's the best thing that we'll consider that will keep our children safe.
I think we get the general gist of the bill. Usually the first speeches in there is usually about 10 minutes long. But it's interesting hearing much of the life experience that Greg O'Connor has mentioned in this member's bill that you probably wouldn't get in a normal government bill or most legislation.
Yeah, can I just say that I I've been watching this bill the whole way through, and I quite like it. I really enjoy it. Because it's like, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I reckon this is one of the best members' bills we've had in a long, long time.
Yeah.
Probably say on par with Chris Bishop's kidney donor compensation bill. That could possibly be one on par, or Ginny Anderson's, what was it, miscarriage bereavement bill. Would you say that's probably on par with that, Mike?
Yeah, I enjoy both of those as well.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic bill, and let's give credit, to Greg, whether he's from the opposition, Labour. By all means, that was a good bill. It is a good bill, and I think that tightens up provisions to protect our New Zealand children. I mean, I have 2 daughters, and it would shudder me to think of this kind of persons lurking around. And I mean, we have our mothers, our sisters, and even brothers. So we have to, be vigilant. So I think it's good to tighten up provisions around the world. So let's give credit where credit is due. Greg O'Connor did a fantastic members' bill, and it proves that our democracy is alive and well, and that we may have members of the opposition who suggest good bills, and that it is passed. That's good. So the key question is that I understand that it's been passed.
Yes, it has. I'll just go and do the check on here. We just heading onto the bill, and that will, I've got it in the run sheet. The bill has passed third reading, and it's just waiting for Cindy's signature on it.
Oh, that's good. There's a good refinement of law. I mean, what do you think, Rick? You've been deep in contemplation.
Dare I utter the words virtue signalling? This is, okay, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's probably a good thing that it passed, but this sort of stuff is communicated between police forces in different jurisdictions anyway, and if you look at the statistics, this is a minor point, but a properly treated sex offender who's done the programs in jail is in fact far less likely to reoffend than most other offenders. So, are we going to raise the alarm every time a kidnapper goes overseas or an armed robber? I mean, nothing wrong with this bill, but really pretty pointless and just a way for Greg O'Connor to get his name in the paper, I feel.
So it's a kind of virtue signaling in the kind of to score a point and kind of appeal to the centrists, the constituency that may thought that the Labour is flexing on law and crime. You feel that, Rick?
Well,
I mean, law and order is always an easy win for any party. National obviously runs very strongly on it. Labour is trying to put its flag into that particular hill. So nothing wrong with this, but it's not really going to do anything whatsoever. And the risk, as he describes it, is really not there at all.
So basically, under our New Zealand Crimes Act 1961, there are already sufficient provisions working with Europol, Interpol to have a check on all these former pedophiles or rehabilitated pedophiles. Sorry to use that term, but so basically, So it's something like New Zealand Crimes Act 61 already has provisions on security where if a person is linked to terrorist groups or linked to organized crime, then we can do a surveillance on them. So there was this discussion whether we needed the Surveillance Act 2012, I can recall, because there are already sufficient provisions within our common law, criminal law, to do that. So probably that would be your angle of point of view of argument, that was it necessary? It's just virtue signaling just to show, and you think you Nats are strong on crime, we Labour are also strong on crime thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the recidivism rates here from Department of Corrections, and you're looking at 5.2% if they've completed one of the programs in jail. So, other crimes, you're looking at as many as 49% of those people who have served time being returned to jail at some point or another. So sex offending tends to take place once, and then they're broadly middle class, obviously non-violent, usually offenders. They don't offend again. So yeah, okay, sure, we need to keep an eye on them. We're doing that anyway, and this is nonsense.
And I wonder how many people were still ringing their probation or their contact person to say, I'm going overseas for X number of period anyway. If they were doing that to go around the country, they probably were doing that, but the officer who was dealing with that had no legal basis on what to do other than, I can document it, but that's as far as it goes. It doesn't necessarily mean that it gets told to the local police station in Brisbane to say, hi there, we've got a former sex offender sentenced 25 years ago and done that is coming to your city for 2 weeks. That could be, if that particular person wrote in there that, there's a document saying they're leaving and coming back, but it doesn't state something else in there, whereas this law allows that next step to puts a procedure in place that's missing.
I think the procedure's probably there anyway. I think police communicate these sorts of things amongst themselves quite regularly. And then again, as Greg O'Connor said, these are not the worst offenders. They can't leave the country anyway. So I don't know how these offences are classed, but they're not amongst the worst of the worst in the first place. So if a hard-working Brisbane child abuse unit detective is informed that some low-level New Zealand offender is supposedly coming to his town, is he going to do anything about it?
Set up a SWAT team. SWAT team or whatever. But okay, jokes aside, but how about this situation? Like we have a case, I think this was in the early 2000s, right? About how good and virtuous our judicial system is, which I agree it is, because there was a guy who committed manslaughter or murder of a family member, and he actually finished his PhD in prison, came out rehabilitated, be a good Kiwi bloke, and now successful in his field. Of course, for privacy and confidentiality, I won't mention the name. But if you allow that provision for a person already jailed for years to finish his PhD in prison, come out and be successful and be a good bloke now, so how are we going to, the problem also has to do with this technical contextual side in the area of law. I do have 2 law degrees, and so in context of discussion on judicial law, right, you have a situation where that guy was 18 years old. He had sexual connections with a 16-year-old underage, all right? But the age gap is only 2 years. They're like boyfriend and girlfriend. Girl or boy then leaves each other, then girl then revenge or whatever, reports to mother then informs police, then he'll be slapped with pedophilia. Like lurking 65-year-old or 70-year-old man lurking around children's toilets. So, I mean, can you see that he's actually just a girlfriend at 16?
And actually, an example of that was the statutory rape law that's in there wasn't targeted for a 16-year-old to be punished for sleeping with a 15-year-old. As a good example that has been put in the law. The law was to catch someone who was 50 sleeping with the 15-year-old.
All right. So
that's the principal intention of that's an example of where a law where the law states to a 16-year-old can't sleep with a 15-year-old, but it wasn't. The premise wasn't for it to go after the 16-year-old sleeping with the 15-year-old who is not far off turning 16. It was designed to go after the much older, the more sexual violence sort of approach.
The ones who are violent types, eh?
And 16 has become that age. I mean, this was brought up in Australia with the gay marriage bill, ironically, was that the age of consent at one point was 12 in Roman times.
My God.
So, whereas now that same age of consent, for New Zealand and much of the world is 16. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to Tamafa Paul's speech from the Greens, because this was interesting because the Greens voted in favour of the legislation for third reading.
Koe. Kia ora koutou katoa. I rise today to speak as the Green Party's Justice spokesperson and to outline our position, which has changed since the first and second reading of this bill. I will begin by talking about what we believe in regards to keeping our children safe, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we came to change our position on this bill. We have always been extremely clear that we want to live in a world and contribute to the leadership of this country in a way that makes sure that children and everybody, but particularly children, some of the most vulnerable people in our society, can live free from sexual violence and harm. We know that we have to strengthen the work to prevent sexual violence from ever happening in the first place, and that is why we are so proud to stand here as the party with the first ever Minister for Sexual Violence and Prevention of Family Violence. People who have sexually violated children must be accountable for the heartbreaking and enduring harm that they inflict on people, on children, knowing the devastating trauma and harm that causes for those children's entire lives. Offenders must be accountable and supported to stop their violent behaviour, and there must be restoration and reparation directly to victims and survivors and their needs. We wish to state our position unequivocally because the research and evidence spells out very clearly where the real levers for protecting our children are. And I would like to think that in the work that the previous government did together on Te Ao Rere Kura, the first ever cross-government strategy to eliminate family and sexual violence from our communities, this work to prevent violence against children is in the heart of Te Ao Rere Kura. The way that we came to this position to change our position on this bill is because myself and my colleague Kahurangi Carter, who is the spokesperson for children, when the first and second reading of this bill happened, and we realised that we were the only party that was not supporting this bill, we had some serious questions and it didn't make sense to us. And we felt that as new MPs, without the guidance of our previous MP, Golriz Garaman, who was very staunch on her opposition against this bill, that we had to revisit those reasons and ask ourselves whether that was the right decision to be made or not. And we had lengthy decisions amongst our caucus around why we have the stance that we have and why we might want to change it. And we felt strongly that supporting this bill is an important measure towards protecting the rights of children and the safety of children. So I want to mahi to you, Greg, for your work on this bill, the work that you have done throughout your career to protect children and families to live free from violence. And I want to thank Erica Stanford as well for her work on improving aspects of this bill. And we said in the first reading, I believe, of this bill that if Minister Stanford's amendments could be incorporated into the bill, that we would consider supporting the bill. We've done that. We are supporting the bill now, and it's great that we've got unanimity across the House in taking this important step. So the issue of ending violence against children has been a long-standing priority for us, and as I said before, we are very, very proud of the work that we have achieved together on Te Ao Rere Kura. And this was even during the election last year, I mean, across parties, whether it was Labour, National, Greens, everybody agreed that Te Ao Rere Kura is a blueprint for how we might deal with these really difficult issues like preventing violence in our communities. Te Ao Rere Kura identifies and responds to the drivers of violence, requiring accountability from people using violence and supporting them to change, because that is a really important piece of the puzzle. It's not just identifying who has created harm and following their movements and actions to make sure that they don't cause further harm, but it's actually getting at the root cause of that behaviour and trying to reduce that, because that is a service to the future, and that we're preventing future harm from occurring. So this bill amends the Child Protection Act 2016 to require registered child sex offenders to provide additional information to police before travelling overseas. This information includes addresses of all places they will be staying. All of these things have already been stated in this debate. I think the key thing that we really want to emphasise is that registers by themselves do little in and of themselves to reduce offending. We understand that there are steps that can be taken through this bill to hopefully add some more protection, especially now with the improvements that I mentioned before, thanks to Minister Stanford. We also stand by the very important submission made by the Attorney General on the impact that this bill has on human rights, and the Ministry of Justice, who are at pains to highlight that this legislation is inconsistent with the Bill of Rights Act and therefore risks a dangerous precedent. But that wouldn't be the first time that we had supported a bill that had some warnings against Bora, and we do so because we believe in the rights of children to live free from violence. The Select Committee's own report noted that the statement of the Attorney General that evidence is limited as to the effectiveness of sex offender registers in improving public safety. The report quotes that he, the Attorney General, considered that the intrusion on that right to benefit from lesser penalty where penalties change was not in due proportion to the importance of the objective of the bill and could not be demonstrably justified. Now, we do in this House weigh up public interest and public benefits whenever we have to consider breaching the Bill of Rights. So in this case, we should all be clear that we are voting in public interest, and for the Greens, with the improvements made to the bill since the first reading, that we consider those reasons in the interest of the public. So, Madam Speaker, in closing, I repeat, the Greens want a world where all children here and across the world live safe lives free from sexual violence and abuse. We know we must strengthen the work to prevent sexual violence from ever happening in the first place. We want to see justice for all victim survivors of sexual violence and abuse, especially for children. People who have sexually violated children must be accountable for the heartbreaking and enduring harm that they have inflicted. Offenders must be accountable and supported to stop their violent behaviour, and there must be restoration and reparation directly to victim survivors and their needs.
That's going on quite some time, but I think we get the message across how the Greens have gone on things, and it's good to see that they've had a turnaround from their previous stance, and I think Tamitha has just thrown Golries under the bus in a polite term.
Can I jump in here, Sam, because I've got a bit of intel on this because I was there last week.
Go ahead. On this bill.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I can't say much, but I kind of knew that they were going to change their mind because this was alluded to when I was in the electorate last week.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a bit of intel when I spoke to Tamitha that they were going to change their mind. So I'm not surprised that they changed their mind because they were very keen on that when I was down there last week.
There was definitely things that were pointing they were heading down that path for a committee of the House.
And that too, but I'm just saying it was very much talked about when I went to that meeting last week.
Yep. Along with many other topics on there.
Yeah.
Rex?
Yeah, again, several issues. Describing that offending as violence, as she did, really misrepresents it. And Greg O'Connor himself said, I think in his opening statements there, that this sort of offending is usually done very quietly, usually with some collusion with the victim, don't tell or else something terrible is going to happen, kind of thing. It's not violence as we understand it. And I think calling it that just muddies the waters a little bit and may well make people less aware of what might be happening under their noses, because there's no violence involved in a lot of the offending. And if they're looking for some signs of violence having been committed against children, then they're going to miss what is actually. And
you probably won't see the damage.
Yes, exactly. And you're right. She threw Golriz Garaman under a bus there, and Golriz, of course, for all her other faults, was a lawyer and had been a lawyer for some time. And I think if a lawyer starts, and a human rights lawyer too, starts raising concerns with a piece of legislation, then it would well behove her party to pay a little bit more attention to that, rather than say, "Thank goodness she's gone. Now we can do our own bit of virtue signaling on this," because they claim to have done their research. It doesn't appear to me that they really have. And again, they seem to have the rose-tinted view that all of this is going to work perfectly, that people are going to honestly disclose where they're going, that when police forces in other jurisdictions are informed, they're going to do the correct follow-up. Really, there's no evidence that any of that is going to happen at all because of this, and I frankly don't think that it will.
Well, just in time for my 10 cents worth of opinion, but
you can't call it too anymore. Inflation.
Well, I don't know. I mean, in a way, it's kind of tightens up a loophole, right? Of let's say relapsing pedophiles who might go overseas and Thailand, God knows where, and South America, and things may, like an alcoholic, reformed alcoholic who now just have one glass of beer a week, who then relapses because they went somewhere where, my gosh, the beer is so cheap, it's like 10 cents New Zealand. And, so maybe it does help. Rick, what do you think? Whether we have a provision?
Untreated alcoholics go on to drink, and untreated pedophiles go on to offend. We know this. People who go through a successful alcohol rehabilitation program generally have a high success rate of staying off of it, as do people who are sex offenders. And all the parties are clapping themselves on the back for targeting this particular group. Are we telling people that rapists are heading to their cities? Not that I'm aware of. Although, as I say again, I'm sure on an informal basis the police are already doing this, and so I doubt the police would let somebody with multiple rape convictions head over somewhere, assuming that they could, without informing their opposite numbers. And I mean, that's another point. Really, you have to declare on your incoming passenger card whether you have any offending. If you don't, you could get picked up anyway, and we see it all the time on border force or security, whatever these programs are, and be banned from the country anyway. So I mean, this is really, I don't know. It's a huge parade of self-congratulation over absolutely nothing.
But I mean, you can also juxtapose a scenario of former meth traffickers that the police would have tightly control their movement. I mean, if they've been convicted for selling meth and causing harm to the community of thousands of Kiwis addicted to meth and all kinds of mental and emotional issues due to this addiction, that we would trust and assume, I'm not sure whether there are provisions where we would have contacted the police of whichever country these said persons rehabilitated from prison, hopefully, and won't sell meth anymore. would kind of not go there and do the same thing. I mean, I'm sure they will be monitored in their movements, or not allowed to leave at all, which is good, I guess. I'm not sure about meth abuses, because they might go and buy cheap meth from Colombia, for goodness sake. So we should then have provisions. So maybe this law can be, I don't know, across the board for all kinds of criminal, previous criminal behavior. But then this might go against the Bill of Rights Act of the liberty of of movement and the right of
unjust punishment as well.
Yeah, I mean, okay, let's say if you're 18 years old and you did something bad, and I mean, let's say, no offense, I mean, if any member of parliament beat up someone and bullied someone, and then we're not going to hold it against him, and you can't become a member of parliament anymore, isn't that right? So if that's the case, then would these provisions be used? Well, there's a danger of that. It can be, this government comes in, which is from the left, then you'll be targeting everyone on the right for let's search it around. Remember, on the right and on the center, and then when the right comes in, let's search for everybody on the.
I mean, and that's been evident as going through the United States, because Trump's been held accountable for his actions. They now want retribution accountability for the sakes of it.
Actually, it's interesting that that example that you raised about an 18-year-old with a 16-year-old. There is a former, very very recent former member of Parliament who has a conviction for precisely that. He was 17 or 18. He was off to join the army. He decided that him and his girlfriend would consummate the relationship before he left. She was 15, and he got a conviction. So he's now going to be subject to this. It would be interesting if he was still in the House to debate the issue. Really, he's become a member of Parliament. He served his country in the army. Personally, I don't like the man. But I have to say, I don't think he's deserving of having a label stuck on him his entire life, like these sorts of things are doing to him.
Yeah, something like former army guy with Victoria Cross fought in Iraq. Is coming to Germany. Let's watch him. You
mentioned all that. Okay, let's see what Todd Stevenson from ACT says about their party's support.
Feel a kumbaya moment coming on, as Cameron Brewer would say, and I want to thank the Greens and Tabitha Paul for her eloquent discussion about how the Greens have changed their position and will be supporting this bill. I think she touched on a lot of very important issues as we debate the Child Protection Amendment Bill. I'm just going to call it, because I don't go with a lot of words in the brackets, isn't there? But I think that was a really great demonstration of how this parliamentary process and going through the readings can actually allow considered debate, discussion, and actually allow parties to consider their position and change it. So no surprise, ACT will be continuing to support Mr O'Connor's excellent members' bill, and again I think a lot of credit should go to him to diligently bringing this through two parliaments, two select committees, and working away to make necessary changes and updates and improvements. And I've got to say, I was lucky enough to be on the Justice Select Committee in this Parliament, and Mr O'Connor would come along and make very constructive contributions, and where he saw there was some things that needed to be adjusted on the advice of officials or other things, submitters, he was very pragmatic, and I think we worked through those issues in a very constructive way. I'm going to talk a bit about why I think this bill is important, because really it is extending New Zealand's duty of care to our children, and we take that very seriously, to actually extending that duty of care to other countries' children, and I think that's a really important element. We know that, and again, Ms Paul actually talked about the kind of horrendous acts of sexual violence against children in New Zealand, and they are some appalling statistics. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. That is appalling, and we must do more to address that. And I, again, want to thank Ms. Paul for saying that actually our criminal justice system isn't up to scratch. And there are some of the issues I know that we're looking at in the Justice Committee. These assaults are really unacceptable. And what the register that we're now really extending overseas does is actually try to protect children by obviously registering our offenders so we know where they are in our community in New Zealand. And what we're doing is, with Mr. O'Connor's bill, is now extending that duty to other countries and really trying to provide useful information that may prevent crimes, sexual crimes against children in other countries. This actually does also, other countries have already got legislation such as this, so I think it's important that New Zealand does its piece to actually update our international obligations. So again, in Australia, they have a similar law where each state and territory must report these details of offenders, where they are, and if they travel outside of Australia, permission is needed, and of course those people are tracked, similar to our bill. And then obviously in the United States, there are different laws, but again, one of them is the International Megan's Law, which is to prevent child exploration by again requiring notification as people are travelling outside the US who are sex offenders. I also want to acknowledge Ms. Paul's discussion around the Bill of Rights, because I think that is actually very important that we do acknowledge that the Bill of Rights report does say that we are actually impinging on people's rights. But I think it's actually a really important process that we have in New Zealand, where when a piece of legislation comes before our Parliament, we actually get these Bill of Rights reports, because it does allow us to see what a piece of legislation, how it measures up against the Bill of Rights, but also allows this Parliament to balance the competing interests. And that's what we're talking about here. There's the competing interests of ensuring that our children are safe and are protected from these pedophile offenders versus their rights. And I think that's a really important discussion that we should have in the open. And I think, having a Bora report like this available for each piece of legislation allows both this House and obviously the Select Committee, which considered this bill, to have that information. And I think that's a really robust piece of our process, that we can actually say, well, where does it make sense to impinge on people's rights in the Bill of Rights, because it's actually for the greater good and it's going to protect people. Again, just briefly turning to the bill, again, it has been mentioned, this was obviously Mr. O'Connor's bill. We obviously had a supplementary order paper from Erica Stanford, which has been incorporated, again, making some useful changes around the interagency sharing of data and making sure that that was all linked up. We also made some other, I think, I talked about some pragmatic changes in the Select Committee, one of those being around the commencement and just giving time for the police to make sure, hopefully when we pass this bill today in this House, yet to be seen, but if that does transpire, it certainly will with the supportive act.
I think Rex would sit there and say more virtual signalling.
Yeah, well, that's what they're all doing. There's not much more to be said, really. Yeah,
we've had the fun part of the bill dealt with.
Right, I find that the bill overall is good. Okay, I know some may not agree with me, but okay. Why it's a good bill, right? Because it kind of tightens provisions in a written way, in a legislated way, and as you can see,
actually how to do things.
Yeah, I'm kind of synchronize it with our Five Eyes partners, Australia and US, where, I think the point that Sam, you brought up very good is about the violent sexual offending. And I'm just use a metaphor of the ones with warriors kind of violence, that kind of gang in the gang members' homes. God knows what happens to the kids there. Are they going to be like subjected to violent outbursts, which is sexual nature, that happens. And in a gang family, I mean, if you're going to be beaten up and really smashed up as a wife, we're not going to be complaining to the police because, you know, you're already part of XYZ gang. So I think those provisions were meant to be focused on the gang violence, once were warriors type of violence. So I think Sam is right to say it's not on that rehabilitated alcoholic type of Salvation Army, rehabilitation program.
Now we've Blake's got to go. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I would say that I do like this contribution, and I like how he pointed out that it was an open conversation. I really like that. What I would say on the way out is I will be talking to Sam about the Māori Awards stuff later this week. So that will be on my channel over on the BFG podcast. If anyone wants to listen to that, I'll be getting his experience on what it's like to give a submission and the process without giving a submission. So I'd like to say thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for having me, Sam.
Thank you, guys. Yeah,
thank you for being there. I'll get to the fun, but I always like doing it at the end of bills.
So on behalf of the Justice Committee, commend the bill to the House.
This is the bit I like.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The motion is agreed. Well done, Mr. O'Connor.
Child Protection, Child Sex Offender Government Agency Registration, Overseas Travel Reporting Amendment Bill, third reading.
So the House is now The House is now suspended for the dinner break.
Oh, well, that's great. We know they're off to dinner now.
Mostly they head to Bellamy. Pretty nice food there. Like, you have funny names like, I think there was a meal like David Lange meal, like really yummy big steak or something. And then they have all the various previous prime ministers with funny names there. So it's kind of expensive for G and Joe blocks like us. I mean, I'm not sure it's like 30, 40, 50 bucks.
Yeah. But no, it's always an interesting thing. I always like seeing the part about the end of the bill, like, going through the whole voting procedure at the end. I always like seeing that particular aspect of it because that actually puts a bit more things on there. And like the fact that they, went to, clap and congratulate on the bill, which is not normally what happens at the end of when a bill passes its third reading. Normally, it's straight on to the next bill.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of positive for, would you say that, Sam, that it's positive for bipartisanship in the sense that opposition and and the current
opposition and government are working together, yes.
Yes. And I think one of the features that speaks from my heart would be in terms of our, talking about King's birthday and the King's realm and our national sovereignty and territorial integrity, that a member's bill or a private public member like me who would personally want to support would be one that is in terms of the defense of the realm, where look, at this point of time, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade Report 2023, that there is going to be a likelihood of a war in the Asia Pacific, of which we will be invariably.
There's many different tasks. I do have a contact who works in Defence Headquarters, and they've been looking at different military exercises and like potential scenarios. They do this, like that's one of his job, is what he does professionally, is to work out potential conflicts and what steps to take to present it or to keep us on the right side. If there is a conflict on there, we're an ally, not an opponent.
Yes. I mean, the Five Powers Defense Arrangement, 1975, where Australia, UK, Malaysia, Singapore, and ourselves, we come to the aid of all of these countries, vice versa, is helpful, and our link to AUKUS. But the thing that I feel strongly that in terms of the our forward defense projection, right now we only have 3 Hercules aircraft. I think 2 is working to give us the early warning system. But that is if Australia or Singapore can scramble their jets in time. But at this time, since we mothballed our jet fighters in 1999, when Helen Clark came in, I mean, she did some good things for the country. I'm not knocking her. I'm just saying that she implemented.
We're going to need to move on because we've got another bill that is the sale and supply of alcohol winery Cellar's door tasting amendment bill, which is quite entertaining.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think we need that 40 FA-18 Hornet jets, right, which is currently in crates in Australia, which is mothballed. And it's like having 40 Mercedes-Benz given to us, and we only need to pay for the maintenance fees. Now, this will give us 3 squadrons, right, of F-18 Hornets, now which is mothballed. My God, they're actually in crates.
We're moving on now, Eric. I understand that, and as a former cadet of ATC, I know what it's like about the planes, but we've got to move on.
All right, mate, all right.
Okay, so now this is the one about the cellar tasting bill. The first set of questions comes from the Honourable Duncan Webb / he's put amendments into the bill. So let's see what Duncan Webb's got to say.
Mr Chair, the member will be aware that I have a number of amendment papers which are aimed at addressing some of what I see as the anomalies or shortcomings in the legislation. And I thought I'd just start, if I may, with amendment paper 30. And that's really about what a winery cellar door is. And I'm concerned that the bill, as it sits on the table, enables a so-called winery cellar door to in fact be a great distance from where the wine is produced. And I'm aware that there's the requirement that a licensing officer has to have the opinion that it is a winery cellar door, but winery cellar door, that must be within the Act. And as amended by this bill, a winery cellar door means retail premises. This is in section 4 of the bill. Winery cellar door means retail premises operated by a person for the purposes of selling grape wine as defined in section 58.3 that is made on or on behalf of that person either on those premises, that's a real winery cellar door, or from produce harvested from land occupied by that person. So it could be that the grapes are grown in Waipara in the Canterbury region, fantastic wine comes from there, but the cellar door could be in Blenheim or Christchurch, could be a great distance away, because that's what a winery cellar door means. Now, my amendment paper, I accept that you could have your vineyard in Omihi, just outside of Waipara, and then your cellar door in the township 5 or 6 kilometres away. That kind of works, I understand. It's within what's expected. It's in the wine region. But certainly not 50, 60, 100, 500 kilometres away. So my amendment paper 30 adds to that and says that the retail premises are located no more than 10 kilometres from where the main ingredients were grown or the wine was manufactured. So it makes it, and the member will remind us that it makes it, it attaches the cellar door to the geographical region from which the wine in this case was produced. And I'm wondering if the member will support that, and if not, can he, because I understand he, in his view, it must be the cellar door, it must be close to the vineyard, but that's not how I read the Act. And if he can work through how I've got that wrong, then my amendment paper is redundant. But I honestly don't see how that could possibly be the case, in which case, Willie, I can't see how he could work through it in a way that doesn't lead to that conclusion, Mr. Ducey. Me being wrong, it's possible. Hasn't happened so far, but it's possible. But frivolity aside, I'm keen to. I understand the member's intention, but I honestly don't think the Act's quite got there. If I'm wrong in his intention or I'm wrong in the interpretation, I'd be keen to hear it. Otherwise, will he support that amendment paper?
an interesting bit of a combination of support my amendment paper to your bill and answer the question. He does answer it in 2 sections later, because I think Helen White also mentioned some interesting things there, talking about being Auckland, which is a very different kettle of fish to the South Island later on.
So, well, in terms of, well, Rick, what do you think? I mean, in the sense that, again, is it again a what we call a blasé across the board law fine tuning when it's contextually meant for the South Island? Is it?
Look, to be honest, I think that was a terrible attempt at explaining what the legislation is meant to do, and it's left me pretty much none the wiser as to what the supposed advantage that they see to this actually is.
So maybe we wait for Stuart Smith's reply later on to find out how he ties everything all up.
Yeah, I've got to say I'm a little bit in the dark, and I don't want to venture into a comment in support or against what they're trying to do, and I really still don't grasp what the point is.
Let's see what. Let's go straight to Stuart Smith's reply and see what that meant.
Yeah, and thank you for the question to both the members. It was quite interesting hearing about your teenage years there. And the wine that you had, which was glitchy, or it was not a descriptor I've used when tasting wine, but it's interesting nonetheless. So going to the last part of the question, the second part of your question, why is this for wine? Why are we discriminating between wine and beer? Well, wine and beer are different, quite different under the law as well, and this Bill, what you've described and what your desire to support the brewers sounds like an excellent members' bill for you to bring to the House. Members' bills are about narrow issues that you can generally get agreement with to be successful. And that was why I bought this bill in the way it was. We've been through the select committee process already, and we've heard evidence and improved the bill. We didn't do that with beer in mind. If we had beer, and I know one of Dr. Webb's amendment papers alludes to having brewers beer available in tasting size of 115 mils versus 35 mil for wine. But beer can have alcohol levels similar to wine. To be a wine, the minimum amount of alcohol you can have to be classed as a wine under the law is 8.5%. There are a lot of beers over 8.5%. And so why would you have a different tasting amount like that if it's similar to a wine? So the rationale is we didn't do the work on that. I didn't intend to bring that in. I'm not against, personally I wouldn't, if someone bought a member's bill for allowing brewers to have cellar doors in a similar way under the licences that wineries have, I would support that, subject to it meeting all the right criteria. But I haven't done that work on brewers, nor have I done it on distillers. And so they're quite different products, and they are differently referred to differently in the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. So the work hasn't been done. In terms of cellar doors and their location, the reality is, if I can quote from Clause 7, so it amends Section 32 of the Act, and it says for kinds of premises for which off licences may be issued, which is what we're talking about here, is for premises that, in the opinion of the licensing authority or the licensing committee concerned, are a cellar door. So you would have to convince the licensing authorities that it was a valid cellar door. Now, Dr. Webb talked about the bottom part of my electorate, actually Waipara, not quite the bottom, almost, and opening a cellar door for wines produced in that area. you'd have to actually convince the licensing authority or the licensing committee that that was a valid cellar door. And I can tell you from experience of dealing with licensing authorities and licensing committees, although I've only done it for my own purposes, that actually they are not silly people. They don't have the wool pulled over their eyes. They're very practical, and they will interpret the law sometimes too harshly. So I have no fear that that will be anything that will cause any problem in the law the way it is written. So thank you.
Tom Rutherford.
Mr. Chair, fantastic.
Okay, a little bit sleep at the wheel there for me. Did that really help explain a few things better to you, Rex, or not?
Not really, no. We angst so much in this country over our alcohol laws, and we seem to be trying to find the magic formula on the supply side of the equation, which will remove or at least significantly reduce all the negative effects of excess alcohol abuse. We do very, very little on the demand side of it, and that's the only thing that's going to stop it is to make it as socially unacceptable to be falling down drunk and vomiting in the pavements of Courtenay Place and no doubt other places in other cities as it is to drink and drive or smoke in an enclosed space now. And we're not doing very much on that. We're still trying to interfere with businesses' rights to sell and allow sampling of their products, as if that's going to fix anything at all.
Well, it's actually more, I think you said it well, Rick, the demand side. I mean, like if you have one or two beers, if you have like a few cartons of beers, and then you go into the street, you fall down on the pavement. I mean, so it's again, sorry,
yeah,
sir.
License, you can walk, effectively, you could walk into a bottle store, buy 20 bottles of spirits,
right?
Walk up to the counter, pay for it, and walk out, and there is nothing under the law that would prevent the person from buying 20 bottles of spirits in there because they're sober at the point of sale. And even if you had a breathalyzer there and they blow a 0 reading, they class as sober. Now, someone buying 20 bottles of spirits there might actually be a restaurant who had their spirit supply run out. But under the law, you can do that, but you can't sit there and drink 20 bottles worth of spirits of alcohol as one person, or even as a group of, say, 10 people at a bar. That's something that would not happen in an old licensed premises. You'll not be able to do that. But in an off-licensed situation, you can buy 20 bottles of spirits and pay for it. You'll probably be spending at least $1,000, but walk out the door.
Yeah, liquor licensing is a logical. I can remember I first went to Western Australia and I was in a bar at midnight, and we decided, look, we've had about a drink each. Let's get some and go home, because they also had an off license, rather than risk drinking or driving or have to pay for a taxi home. Went up to the bar and said, I'll take a 6-pack. No, sorry, we're not allowed to sell those after midnight. And I said, so I can keep drinking here? Oh, yes, yeah, I can drink 20 more drinks. Yes, feel free. And that was the logic in that particular licensing law at the time, or the complete lack thereof. And again, trying to control behaviour through supply side law, whereas what they needed to do was consider, well, what might the demand be? Let's get these people home safely with the drink to drink at home.
Or like a courtesy van or something like that.
or something. Yeah, I mean, you've still got issues around leaving your car and so forth. But it's not, there's no logic that ever seems to go into licensing law that looks at the demand and how do we work with this demand that people have in handling it as it is at the moment and in reducing it over the longer term. No, let's start messing around with businesses' rights to sell product.
Or you get the other extreme. That was an 8-year battle with Auckland Council with Progressive over the default trading hours. Progressive took Auckland Council to court, right up to the Supreme Court, to basically say, oh no, we want 11 p.m. liquor licensing closes and 7 a.m. opens. You're infringing on our rights, because that was the default for off license set in the Act. Even though it said in the Act that local councils could adopt their own local policies within those times, and Auckland Council wanted it reduced to 10 p.m. and Countdown took it to the Supreme Court of New Zealand to keep it at 11 and have it as early as 7 a.m. in the morning. And I've actually been into a supermarket at 6:50 in the morning and watched the cashier at the supermarket said, we're going to have to wait 10 minutes so I can sell you that bottle. I can't sell it till 7 a.m. But it was, those sorts of like the fact that Countdown took that to court and dragged it on for 8 years, that Auckland Council effectively had its own liquor licensing alcohol policy handicapped. So you've got the corporations who fight it in the trying to keep the maximum the law allows.
Yeah, we really need a blank page approach to liquor in this country, but there's far too much emotion around it, a bit like the whole child sex offending thing, for anybody to actually be able to sit down and discuss it calmly, unfortunately.
And also you'll have the what's ifs of every single wacky, crazy scenario that may have never happened.
Yes,
indeed. And I think I guess the point here is more like the child sex offenders bill of the once were warriors type of violent offending. Okay, you have like heaps of beers and you lose your mind. You go out for fights. You beat up your kids. That kind of fear, which has happened. I mean, there has been cases of domestic abuse from too much alcohol drinking, leading to unwanted circumstances, tragically in some cases. So perhaps the law is meant to tighten this aspect of it, but it may also affect the that Rick pointed out, businesses have a right to sell their products. So if not, what's the product there for? And I mean, for goodness sake, someone could be buying like 3 cartons of cheap beer and having 1 beer a day from his fridge. So
yeah, exactly. Because they're good at self-control.
Yeah. So it's how when we make laws, we got to be very careful to evaluate the context, and because if we do it across the board, does it affect the real intent of the bill? And so that's something for us to look at. And I think some countries, not extolling or lauding it, like in the European Union, where I did research for the European Commission for a few years, they are very research intensive because they're talking about 27 countries that you implement the law is across the board. Okay, so they really research it, and with all the independent researchers for the 27 countries grouped together and then research it again. So then it comes into law, it is fine-tuned to make sure that all the contextual variables are looked at. Now, this is the policy analyst side, which is the good side of it, not the just having a title and enjoying the government pay. But the point here I'm trying to say is that if we research something well and make it into good law, it becomes good law. It's legislative.
We're going to have to call it on the quits on that one because we've got 7 minutes to go. For bills that are coming up that are due now, in this particular case, there's one that's due tonight, and then the next bill's due 11 days away. So the contracts of insurance bill is due tonight for your submissions if you would like to sit there and put that on there. The privacy amendment bill submissions are due on the 14th. Now, I'll give a little bit of what the principle of the bill, because Paul Barlow did mention a bit on there was the bill proposed to improve transparencies for individuals about the collection of their personal information. This bill will create a new notification obligation on an agency when collected. It collects personal information indirectly. It would also make some technical amendments to remedy minor issues that have arisen since the Principal Act came into force, and goes onto the website to sit there and do that. And then the last one is the Te Piri Mo Orako Te Pai, or was it More Mahara Orako Remembrance Bill, which I think Paul Barlow actually knew a lot about it because it was based in an area in the Waikato where they built a road through the middle of a pāo. So that sort of things there. So those are what's on the bills to come up for the submissions. Panel, how have you found today's show?
Oh dear. As a cynic, it deepened my cynicism. Really, looking at what Parliament is spending its time on when there are, serious things to be considered. Whether we should be tagging half a dozen sex offenders who might want to go on holiday. Whether somebody can serve you a 30 ml or 150 ml sample of their beer. Come on, we've got bigger issues, bigger fish to fry, people.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to say let's not do all the splitting of hairs and then lose the main focus on the important things. Look at the 68,000 potholes, right? I mean, that is kind of dangerous if a truck.
You don't need to bill to pass Parliament to fix those, right?
I know, but at least, let's give credit where it's due. The government is addressing the 68,000 potholes. The Whakatōhea or Road Transport Agency now is addressing
whatever it's called.
I mean, instead of building canoes on the road, like Winston is saying, I mean, at least they're fixing the potholes now. And how about that? What do you call that? Kids are banned now from having cell phones for at least, thank God, 6 hours. Without being affected by 15-second sound bites from the media, social, you name it. They don't know who they are talking to. So, I mean, at least they are banned from having cell phones, which I think was a good law, where now they can, for goodness sake, concentrate on maths, science, English, Māori, and little languages, French, you name it. But I think these are good bills. I mean, there are good stuff coming in. We can't throw the baby out with the dirty bathwater. We clear the bathwater, and the baby stands there. And so I think those two are good laws. I mean, that's my point of view. But the scenic side is fantastic also because you are pointing out things that people don't look at and tend to show. So I think we need all these plethora of views in our healthy democracy. So I think today is paneling, though not many of us today, and most having the holidays and the beers. And it's still good. It's a healthy democracy. Sam, what do you think?
Well, we'll certainly find out what's happening on there. Now, for what Blake was mentioning about so I have booked, so it's in the ballot, has been accepted for to present our submission on the Māori wards bill, which so I've sent off requesting for next Wednesday to be that day. As would say, us as an organisation, we principally oppose the referendum process of the Māori wards, considering it tends to end up throwing quality information out the window in place for misinformation, and also the fact that you cannot do it on a general ward or a community board. We have supported the one section of the bill, which is the extension to the voting nomination and voting periods for the from the 2025 local body elections onwards, which would extend voting periods for an extra 2 weeks, and also the nominations is 2 weeks earlier, which coincides with to be voting earlier, and this will give a longer run in time for elections, and hopefully in turn gives voters more opportunity to scrutinise their candidates, more opportunity to get to meet the candidates' meetings, and more opportunity to do research when it comes to voting. So that aspect of the bill we do support, but the other aspect about the Māori wards part, we do believe that is going to do it. And as us as an organisation, we've been subjected to that racism by some people who misunderstand what holding a debate on a ward that has candidates standing, equating it to ramming Māori culture down their throat is what we've been, which is completely incorrect. Our format is about debate. It is about letting you, the voter, knows who the candidates are, using our It's in the Ballot format. So yes, and I will later on have a appearance on the BFG podcast and pull the other one regarding that experience through the select committee. So yeah, that's what's been happening. Thank you, Rex and Eric, for being part of today's Order Paper panel.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Thanks.
And
we'll see everyone back next Monday, where we'll cover the government's urgency, 3 days worth of sitting post-budget. So we'll see you in about a week's time, back from here for the same things on there, and we'll give a bit of an update on what's happening with Tauranga City Council, local body elections, and who's appearing. So thanks. See you then.
All right, guys. Have a good day.
Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/it'sintheballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions, live at 12 p.m. New Zealand.